Emily had always dreamed of owning a home. As a young woman in her late 20s, living in a small rented apartment, the idea of owning a place of her own seemed like something far off in the future. But rent had become a burden. It felt like she was throwing money away every month, paying someone else for a space that was never truly hers. She wanted to break free from that cycle. She wanted something she could call her own, something that would give her the stability and freedom she craved. At first, the idea of buying a house seemed impossible. She wasn't rich, and she certainly wasn't in a position to make huge financial commitments. But as the rent prices in her area kept climbing, she started to wonder, could I actually afford a house? She knew the typical answer was no, but what if there was a way? One afternoon, Emily sat down with her laptop, opened a real estate website, and started browsing listings. She wasn't looking for anything grand. In fact, she was specifically searching for something small and affordable. Maybe a fixer-upper or a house on the cheaper side of town. After all, she could put in some work, save money on a mortgage, and still have more space than she did in her cramped apartment. As she clicked through listing after listing, something caught her eye. A small old house located on a quiet street just outside the city. The photos didn't do it justice, but there was something about the house that made her stop scrolling. The listing was almost too good to be true. The price was far lower than any other house she had seen in her search. The description said the house had been built in the early 1900s, and though it had seen better days, it still had a lot of character. There were a few issues, sure, old plumbing, creaky floors, and a couple of rooms that needed new paint. But the price was almost half of what she had been paying in rent. It was more affordable than anything she could have imagined. Emily felt a spark of excitement. She knew it was a long shot, but what did she have to lose? Maybe this was her opportunity to finally own a home. She spent the next few days doing as much research as she could about the house. It was located on a quiet street, surrounded by trees and older homes with a park just a few blocks away. The neighbors seemed friendly, and the area was close enough to her job that she wouldn't have to commute for hours every day. The more Emily thought about it, the more it seemed like a real possibility. She didn't need anything fancy. She just needed a space she could call her own. A place where she could be comfortable, decorate as she wished, and not have to worry about paying rent every month. This house could be it. But there were still questions lingering in her mind. Was the house really worth it? Would the repairs be more than she could handle? What if there were hidden problems she couldn't see from the photos? Emily wasn't a contractor, and she didn't have a ton of experience fixing up old homes. But she was determined. She figured she could hire professionals for the bigger projects and take care of the smaller things herself. After all, how hard could it be to sand down some floors and paint a few rooms? With a little encouragement from a couple of friends who thought it was a great idea, Emily decided to take the plunge. She contacted the realtor and arranged for a viewing. The day of the viewing, she was nervous but also excited. She walked through the front door of the house and immediately felt a sense of possibility. Sure, the walls could use a fresh coat of paint and the kitchen was outdated, but there was something special about the space. It had tall windows that let in plenty of natural light, and the old hardwood floors had a charm that no new construction could match. Emily spent the next hour walking through each room, mentally taking notes on what needed fixing and what could be worked with. The basement was a little musty, but that was to be expected in an older house. The roof seemed solid, and the backyard, though overgrown, had the potential to be a small garden. By the time the viewing ended, Emily was feeling more confident. She didn't expect it to be perfect, but she knew that with a little elbow grease and some time, this could be a real home for her. It would be hers. The next step was to make an offer. The thought of taking on a mortgage was intimidating, but the idea of not having to pay rent anymore made it feel worth it. Emily knew she wasn't rich, but she had saved up a small nest egg over the years. With a bit of help from a bank loan and a small personal loan from a family member, she would be able to afford the down payment and start the process of making the house her own. She sat down with the realtor and made the offer. She kept it simple, hoping that the seller would accept it without too much back and forth. The seller had already reduced the price once, and it seemed like they might be willing to let it go for a little less. When the call came a few days later, Emily held her breath. The seller had accepted her offer. She couldn't believe it. She had done it. She was going to be a homeowner. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, inspections, and excitement. Emily didn't know the first thing about what went into buying a house, but she learned quickly. The process was far more complicated than she had imagined, but she took it step by step. The inspector found a few things that needed attention. Some minor electrical work, a few small leaks, but nothing that would stop the deal from going through. And then, finally, it was official. The house was hers. Emily stood in the middle of the living room, looking around at the empty space. It was a feeling she couldn't quite put into words. She had imagined this moment so many times before, but now that it was real, it felt surreal. This was hers. Every crack in the wall, every uneven floorboard was part of her new life. She was no longer just paying for a place to live. This was a place she could shape and build into something truly hers. That night, she sat on the floor with a cup of tea, feeling both excited and overwhelmed. She thought about all the work that lay ahead, renovating, decorating, and making the house comfortable, but she knew it was going to be worth it. It would take time, but slowly the house would become a home. What she didn't know at the time, though, was that this was just the beginning. She had no idea that beneath the surface of her new home, hidden away for decades, lay something far more valuable than she could have ever imagined. But that discovery, the one that would change everything, was still a few months away. For now, Emily was content. She had her own place. And that, for the moment, was enough. It had been a few weeks since Emily officially moved into her new home. The excitement of becoming a homeowner hadn't worn off, though the reality of the work ahead was beginning to set in. She spent her mornings teaching, and her afternoons and weekends were filled with unpacking boxes, sorting through clutter, and beginning the daunting task of fixing up the house. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but Emily loved it. There was something comforting about the creaky floors, the way the old wood seemed to tell its own story. The house had a charm that couldn't be replicated in new construction. The first project Emily took on was the garden. The backyard was overgrown with weeds, and the small patch of grass in the corner had been left to run wild. She spent days pulling out thorny bushes, trimming branches, and clearing away debris. It was hard work, but Emily enjoyed it. There was something peaceful about digging in the dirt and watching the yard slowly take shape. She imagined a small flower bed, maybe a couple of raised garden boxes for vegetables, and a comfortable place to sit outside in the evenings. Inside the house, Emily started with the kitchen. It was functional but outdated. The cabinets were a faded shade of yellow, and the countertops looked like they belonged to a different era. But she could see the potential. She decided to keep the cabinets but gave them a fresh coat of white paint. She replaced the old faucet and added a new backsplash to brighten up the space. It wasn't a full renovation, but it made the kitchen feel cleaner and more modern. The living room, though, was a different story. The room had good bones, but the walls were covered in wallpaper from the 70s, and the carpet was stained from years of neglect. Emily knew that replacing the carpet would be expensive, so she started with the wallpaper. She spent a weekend scraping it off, her arms sore from hours of labor. Once the walls were bare, she painted them a soft light blue. It took a little longer than expected, but by the end of the week, the living room felt brand new. But no matter how much work Emily put into making the house feel like her own, there was always one area she had yet to touch, the basement. The basement was a strange place. It was dark and musty, with low ceilings and cracked cement floors. There was a faint smell of mildew that Emily couldn't seem to get rid of no matter how much she aired it out. She hadn't ventured down there much. It wasn't a place that felt welcoming or even safe. One evening, after a long day of working on the upstairs, Emily decided to finally face the basement. She knew it wasn't going to be pleasant, but she couldn't put it off forever. The house was old, and she knew she needed to check things like the plumbing and the electrical wiring. She had to make sure everything was in good condition, especially before winter hit. With a flashlight in hand, Emily slowly descended the wooden steps into the basement. The air was thick with dampness, and the smell was stronger down here. She coughed and made her way over to the far corner, where an old workbench sat under a dusty window. It was cluttered with old tools, rusty nails, and bits of broken furniture. It didn't look like anyone had used this space in years. As she moved further into the basement, she noticed a patch of floor that seemed a little different from the rest. It wasn't cracked like the others, and it didn't have the same worn, concrete look. Instead, it looked newer, almost as if it had been patched up. Emily crouched down to examine it more closely. She ran her fingers over the edges and noticed that the floorboard felt hollow underneath. Curious, she grabbed a crowbar that was lying nearby and gently pried up the boards. Beneath the floor, hidden away in the small cavity, was a metal box. It was old and rusted, its edges bent and weathered by time. The box looked like it had been shoved deep into the ground and forgotten. Emily felt a rush of excitement mixed with uncertainty. What could it be? She hadn't expected to find anything, but now her curiosity was piqued. With trembling hands, she pulled the box from its hiding spot. It was heavy, much heavier than she expected, and the metal felt cold against her palms. Emily wiped away the dirt and dust, revealing the faded latch that kept the box shut. It was locked, but the lock was old and rusted, and with a little effort she managed to break it open. Inside the box was something she had never imagined: piles of old coins, some wrapped in faded newspaper, others loose and scattered. There were also pieces of jewelry: gold rings, bracelets, and even a couple of necklaces. The jewelry was tarnished and worn, but the gold still gleamed faintly in the dim light of the basement. Emily's heart raced as she looked at the contents of the box. This wasn't just junk. This was something valuable. She had no idea how much, but it was clear that this wasn't just a box of old trinkets. Along with the coins and jewelry was a stack of old letters, yellowed with age. Emily picked them up and carefully opened one. It was written in neat flowing handwriting, but the ink had faded over the years. The letter appeared to be from someone named Agnes to a person named Thomas. The words spoke of love, loss, and memories from a time long past. Emily couldn't make sense of the whole letter, but she could tell it was deeply personal. As she sat there, surrounded by the contents of the box, Emily couldn't help but wonder, who had hidden this treasure? And why had they gone to such lengths to keep it hidden? It was clear that someone had gone to a lot of trouble to stash these valuable items away. But for what reason? Had they been protecting their wealth? Or was it something more personal? Maybe a secret that needed to be kept? Emily was overwhelmed. She had never imagined she would find something like this. It felt like something out of a movie. But here she was, sitting in her dusty basement holding a box full of treasure. She wasn't sure what to do next. Part of her wanted to keep it for herself. After all, it was hers, right? She had found it. But another part of her felt uneasy. Who had this belonged to? Who had hidden it there all those years ago? After a long pause, Emily decided to leave the basement for the night. She carefully placed the box back in its hiding spot, covering it up with the floorboards just as she had found it. She couldn't bring herself to take the items upstairs just yet. It didn't feel right. The discovery was too big, too mysterious. She needed time to think. For the next few days, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled onto something important. She thought about the old letters and the strange sense of secrecy that surrounded the box. The house had already felt like it held secrets, but this was something different, something deeper. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She knew she needed to find out more. But for now, Emily kept the discovery to herself. The house still needed work, and she couldn't allow herself to get too distracted by the mystery in her basement. She had her own life to live, after all. But the box, the coins, the jewelry, they were never far from her thoughts. And one day she knew she would have to face the question of what to do with it all. The story of the treasure was only just beginning, and Emily had no idea how much it would change her life. For the next few days, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the box she had found. It felt like the mystery was nagging at her, demanding her attention. It wasn't just about the treasure. It was about what the treasure meant. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide it, and now Emily was left holding the key to a secret that had been buried for decades. The letters, the coins, the jewelry, they all spoke of a past that seemed almost too distant to reach. Yet, despite her curiosity, Emily resisted the temptation to dive deeper into the mystery. There was still so much work to do around the house. The kitchen needed a new set of shelves, the windows upstairs had to be resealed, and the backyard was still a work in progress. She didn't have the time to get caught up in what felt like an old ghost story. But the more time passed, the more Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the house was somehow watching her. She had always believed in the idea that a house could have a personality, a spirit of its own. It wasn't just the structure of walls and beams, but something deeper, the history it carried within it, the memories it held. This house, despite its creaky floors and outdated fixtures, felt alive, and every time she walked past the basement, she felt the pull to uncover its secrets. One evening, When the sun had just dipped below the horizon and the evening air felt cool and crisp, Emily found herself standing in front of the basement door. She had been avoiding it, but tonight, the urge to open it was overwhelming. She wanted to know more. She had to know more. She grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen, took a deep breath, and descended the stairs again. The basement was just as dark and musty as she remembered, but tonight it felt different, more charged, as if the house itself was urging her to take the next step. Emily hesitated for a moment at the bottom of the stairs before walking over to where she had hidden the box. The floorboard still looked the same, worn and weathered. She crouched down, gently pried up the boards, and retrieved the box. It felt cold and heavy in her hands, almost as if it had a weight to it that went beyond its physical mass. She set it down on the old workbench and stared at it for a moment. This was it. There was no turning back now. Emily carefully opened the box once again. The smell of old paper and dust filled the air. The coins were still there, their edges tarnished but undeniably valuable. The jewelry shimmered faintly in the dim light, its age giving it an almost antique beauty. But it was the letters that caught her attention once again. She picked one up, her fingers brushing over the faded ink as she opened it. This time, Emily took her time reading the letter more carefully. It was written by someone named Agnes, but the tone was different from the first letter she had read. This one spoke of loss, of a love that had been ripped apart by circumstances beyond their control. Agnes had written it to someone named Thomas, but she spoke as though he were no longer alive. The words were filled with sorrow, yet there was also a sense of finality in them. She wrote about the memories they had shared, the days they had spent together, and the promise they had made to one another. Emily was drawn into the letter, her mind racing with questions. Who were these people? Why had Agnes felt the need to write this letter in such a way, as if she were leaving a message for someone who would never read it? It was clear that the relationship between Agnes and Thomas was something deep, something tragic. As she continued to read, Emily realized that the box wasn't just a collection of hidden treasures. It was a snapshot of a love story, a story that had been preserved for years, tucked away in the dusty corners of a forgotten basement. And now Emily was holding the key to that story. But what was she supposed to do with it? She wasn't sure if it was her place to uncover the full story. After all, it wasn't her history. It was someone else's. And yet the pull of curiosity was too strong. She wanted to know more. She needed to understand what had happened to Agnes and Thomas. What had led them to hide these things away in this basement? Over the next few days, Emily spent her spare time reading through the letters one by one. They were all written by Agnes, each one filled with the same melancholy tone, the same sense of yearning. It became clear that Agnes had never truly moved on from her love for Thomas. Each letter was a piece of a puzzle that Emily was slowly starting to put together. In the letters, Agnes spoke of a time when life had been simple, when love had been enough to carry them through the hardest days. But there were hints of something darker lurking beneath the surface, mentions of a family feud, whispers of something that had torn them apart. Emily couldn't help but wonder if this love had been forbidden, if Agnes and Thomas had been forced to keep their relationship a secret for reasons beyond their control. The more Emily read, the more she found herself consumed by the story. She couldn't stop thinking about it. It was as if Agnes and Thomas had become real people to her, their pain and longing echoing through the pages. The treasure in the box, the coins, the jewelry, seemed almost secondary now. It was the story that mattered. It was the story that Emily couldn't let go of, but there was still so much she didn't know. Emily needed answers. She needed to find out who Agnes and Thomas were, what had happened to them, and why their story had been hidden away for so long. Her first step was to do some research. She visited the local library, hoping to find any record of Agnes and Thomas, perhaps an old newspaper article, a marriage license, or even an obituary. She spent hours combing through old records, but found nothing. It was as if they had never existed at all. Frustrated but determined, Emily decided to take a different approach. She started asking around the neighborhood, talking to the older residents who had lived there for years. She mentioned the house and its previous owners, hoping someone might know something about them. One afternoon, Emily met an elderly woman who had lived in the area for decades. When Emily mentioned the name Agnes, the woman's eyes widened, and for a moment Emily thought she might have struck gold. The woman hesitated before speaking. "I remember Agnes," she said softly. "She used to live in that house many, many years ago. But she didn't stay long. No one really knew what happened to her. It was like she just disappeared one day." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Agnes had lived in the house? Could it be that the box had belonged to her? She pressed the woman for more details, but the elderly woman seemed reluctant to say much more. "She was a sweet girl," the woman continued, "but she had a rough life, I think. Her family didn't approve of her choices, and there were rumors about her relationship with Thomas. No one ever found out what really happened between them, but it wasn't good." That was all Emily could get out of her, but it was enough to confirm her suspicions. Agnes and Thomas had been something more than just a memory. They had been real people with their own struggles and secrets, and Emily had unknowingly become part of their story. With a new sense of purpose, Emily decided she couldn't just leave it at that. She had to learn the truth, not just for her own sake, but for Agnes and Thomas as well. They deserved to have their story told, and so Emily set out on a mission. She would uncover every detail, no matter how long it took. She would find out what had happened to Agnes and Thomas, and why their love had been buried in the basement of her house for all these years. What started as a small discovery had now turned into an obsession, but Emily didn't mind. She felt like she was getting closer to something that mattered, something that had been hidden away for far too long. The mystery of the box was only the beginning. As the days passed, Emily's obsession with the story of Agnes and Thomas grew stronger. The more she thought about their lives, the more determined she became to uncover the truth. It wasn't just about the treasure anymore. It was about giving them a voice, about letting their story be known, even if it had been hidden for decades. She spent hours every day poring over the letters from the box. The words felt like whispers from another time, and they kept calling her back to the basement. There was a quiet urgency in the way Agnes had written, like she was reaching out across the years trying to tell someone her story. Emily had to know what happened. She couldn't let it go. It was becoming clear that Agnes's life had been filled with struggle. Her love for Thomas, as deep and as passionate as it seemed, had been tainted by something else. Emily didn't know if it was family pressure, societal expectations, or something darker that had torn them apart, but she was determined to find out. She started talking to more people in the neighborhood, asking questions about Agnes and Thomas. The responses were often vague, and most people seemed hesitant to talk about them. It was like the memories of their time in the house were shrouded in secrecy, but Emily didn't give up. She kept asking, keeping the hope alive that someone might finally say something that would shed light on their story. One afternoon, after weeks of searching, Emily came across an old photograph at the local library. It was a black and white image of a young couple standing in front of a house. The woman had dark hair, neatly styled, and a gentle smile. The man beside her had broad shoulders and a strong presence. There was something in their eyes, something that made Emily's heart race. She couldn't be sure, but she felt like she was looking at Agnes and Thomas. The photograph was tucked inside a folder of old newspaper clippings, none of which seemed to be related to the people in the picture, but Emily couldn't ignore the strong connection she felt to it. There was a caption on the back of the photo, faded with time, but it was still readable: Agnes and Thomas, 1924. The last photo before their disappearance. Her breath caught in her throat. Disappearance? What did that mean? Had they vanished without a trace? Emily took the photo back to her small apartment, her mind racing with questions. The photograph was the first concrete clue she had found that could tie the mystery together. Agnes and Thomas had vanished. But why? What had happened to them? Was the treasure in the basement somehow connected to their disappearance? The more Emily thought about it, the more the puzzle pieces started to fall into place. She recalled what the elderly woman in the neighborhood had said about Agnes, how her family didn't approve of her relationship with Thomas, how there were rumors surrounding their love. Could it be that their love had been so controversial that it had caused them to run away, or had something darker happened to them? Was there a secret that no one had ever spoken of? Emily needed to dig deeper. She couldn't stop now, not when she was so close. She decided to visit the local courthouse the next day. There might be records there, perhaps a marriage license, a missing persons report, or even something more. It felt like a long shot, but it was all she had. The courthouse was an old building with creaky wooden floors and a sense of history in every corner. Emily walked through the halls looking at the rows of filing cabinets, wondering if she would ever find what she was looking for. She spoke with the clerk, who seemed a little skeptical at first, but after a brief exchange, agreed to help her search through the old records. It took hours, but eventually, they found something. It was a marriage certificate. Agnes and Thomas had gotten married in 1922, just a couple of years before they disappeared. The certificate confirmed their identities, but there was no mention of what had happened to them after that. There were no death records, no divorce filings, and no missing persons reports. It was as if they had simply disappeared from the face of the earth. Emily left the courthouse feeling both triumphant and frustrated. She had learned a lot, but she still had so many unanswered questions. She had discovered that Agnes and Thomas were indeed married, which meant their love had been real. Yet that was just one piece of the puzzle. What had happened to them? Why had they vanished? Determined to get more answers, Emily decided to return to the house. She needed to spend more time in the basement, to go through the letters again to see if she had missed something. She wanted to understand more about their lives, their struggles, and why they had hidden everything away. The house, once a place of excitement and hope for Emily, now felt heavier. She couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were holding secrets, secrets that had been buried long before she ever moved in. It was like the house had been waiting for someone to come along and unravel its mysteries. Emily headed down to the basement that evening, flashlight in hand. The familiar smell of dust and mildew greeted her as she descended the stairs. She felt an odd sense of calm mixed with anticipation, knowing that she was about to dig even deeper into the past. She knelt down to the workbench and opened the box again. This time, she didn't just look at the coins or the jewelry. She carefully unfolded every letter, reading them over and over, trying to find something new. She started to see patterns in the way Agnes wrote. There were mentions of escape and freedom, of longing and fear. But there was one letter that stood out to Emily. It wasn't like the others. It was written in a frantic, almost desperate tone. "I can't go on like this. My family won't accept us, and the more we try to be together, the more I feel we're being torn apart. I fear for us, Thomas. They won't let us be. If you're reading this, I don't know what will happen, but I need to be with you always." It was clear now. Agnes and Thomas had been fighting against something much larger than themselves. It wasn't just their families, it was society. They had been forced to live in the shadows, to hide their love. Emily's heart ached as she read the words over again, realizing just how difficult and dangerous their love must have been. But what happened after this letter? Did they manage to escape? Did they get caught? Emily couldn't answer those questions. Not yet, but one thing was certain: she couldn't stop searching. The more she learned, the more she realized how important it was to tell their story. Agnes and Thomas had lived and loved in a time when their relationship had been forbidden. Their love had been hidden, but now, decades later, Emily was determined to bring it to light. She spent the next few weeks digging deeper. She visited more archives, spoke to more people, and began piecing together the history of Agnes and Thomas. The more she uncovered, the more she understood how powerful their story was. It wasn't just a tale of love. It was a story of resilience, of defying the odds to be with the person they cared for. But the final piece of the puzzle, the truth about what happened to them, was still elusive. Emily had come far, but there was still so much left to uncover. Her journey was far from over. And with each new discovery, she was getting closer to solving the mystery that had been hidden beneath her feet for so long. Weeks passed, and Emily's search for the truth about Agnes and Thomas began to feel like an endless journey. She had gathered so many pieces of the puzzle, letters, photographs, old records, but there was always one thing missing: the final answer. What had happened to them? Where had they gone? Had they truly escaped, or had their love been destroyed by the very forces they had tried to outrun? Despite the growing frustration, Emily didn't give up. Every day she spent hours combing through archives, old newspapers, and town records. She spoke to more people in the neighborhood, hoping someone might know something, anything that could give her a clue. But most of the people she spoke to either didn't know anything or were too scared to say much. It felt like the town itself was holding its breath, unwilling to let go of the secrets buried in the past. One afternoon, Emily was sitting at her desk, sorting through the last of the letters, when something caught her eye. It wasn't a letter. It was a small folded piece of paper that had been tucked into the very back of the box. It was different from the others, smaller, more fragile. She opened it carefully, her fingers trembling slightly, unsure of what she might find. The paper was covered in scribbled handwriting. It wasn't as neat as Agnes's usual letters. It looked rushed, almost frantic. Emily read it aloud to herself as her heart began to race. "I'm leaving tonight. It's the only way. The family won't let us be, and I fear they're closing in on us. I can't bear the thought of losing you, Thomas, but I must go. If you can't meet me, I will find my way alone. The key is hidden in the cellar. Find it and meet me there. We'll start a new life together. If not, I will always love you." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The key was in the cellar. Could it be? Had Agnes left some sort of hidden message for Thomas in the house? Had she left behind a final clue that would explain everything? Excited but cautious, Emily grabbed the flashlight again and rushed down to the basement. Her heart pounded in her chest as she descended the stairs. It felt like she was stepping into another world, one that was heavy with the weight of time and secrets. She scanned the walls and floor, looking for anything that might indicate where the key could be hidden. She moved slowly around the basement, carefully inspecting every crack, every corner. There had to be something. Her fingers brushed against the wooden beams, the cold stone walls. Her eyes searched for anything unusual, anything that might point her in the right direction. And then she saw it. A loose brick in the wall. At first glance, it seemed like just another part of the old crumbling structure. But as Emily moved closer and pressed her fingers against it, she realized it could be removed. Her hands were shaking as she carefully pried the brick loose. The faint sound of it coming free echoed in the quiet space, and Emily held her breath, wondering what she would find behind it. When the brick finally gave way, she peered inside. There, nestled in the small cavity, was an old rusted key. It was nothing special to look at, just an old-fashioned key worn with age. But to Emily, it felt like the missing piece of the puzzle. This was the key Agnes had left for Thomas, but what was it for? What door did it open? Emily's mind raced as she stood there holding the key in her hand. She thought back to everything she had learned about Agnes and Thomas, their secret love, their struggles, their fight to escape. Had they planned to leave together? Had they planned to run away and start a new life? And if so, why hadn't they? What had gone wrong? She carefully placed the key in her pocket and walked back upstairs, her mind spinning with possibilities. She had to find out more. The key had to lead somewhere, she was certain of it. The next day, Emily spent hours searching every inch of the house. She checked the attic, the closets, the cupboards. She even pulled up the floorboards in the living room, thinking the key might open something hidden beneath them, but there was nothing. No locked door, no hidden compartment. She was beginning to feel desperate when, at last, her eyes landed on something else. A small, old-fashioned door in the back of the house, tucked away behind a thick curtain. She had never noticed it before, probably because it had been obscured by years of neglect. She moved toward it, her heart racing with excitement. Could this be the door the key was meant to open? The door was small, with a simple brass handle. There was no lock on it, at least none that she could see. But as her fingers brushed against the handle, she noticed something strange. A faint engraving on the wood, barely visible in the dim light. It looked like a symbol, but it was so worn that it was hard to make out. Emily traced the symbol with her finger, feeling the grooves in the wood. And then she tried the handle. To her surprise, the door opened with a soft creak. Behind the door was another staircase, one that led down into what seemed to be another part of the house, a part she had never seen before. The air was musty and the steps creaked underfoot as she descended. She could hardly contain her excitement. It felt like she was stepping deeper into the story of Agnes and Thomas, getting closer to the answers she had been searching for. At the bottom of the stairs, Emily found herself in a small, hidden room. It was empty, save for a few dusty old chairs and a small wooden chest in the corner. The chest was plain, unremarkable, except for the fact that it had a lock. Her heart raced as she approached the chest, the key still clutched tightly in her hand. She inserted the key into the lock, and with a gentle turn, the chest opened. Inside, she found more than she could have ever imagined. There were more letters, hundreds of them, carefully folded and stacked. There were old faded photographs of Agnes and Thomas, some she had never seen before. But it wasn't just the letters and photographs that took her breath away. There were items that seemed to hold deep meaning: an old pocket watch, a necklace with a delicate pendant, and a small, leather-bound journal. Emily sat down on the floor and began to sift through the items, her mind reeling with everything she had uncovered. It was as if the chest was a time capsule, a final testament to the love and life of Agnes and Thomas. And then, as she opened the journal, she found the final piece of the story. The journal belonged to Agnes. In it, she wrote about her life with Thomas, her hopes and dreams for their future. She spoke of the hardships they faced, of the secrets they had kept, and of the love that had sustained them through it all. The last entry, dated just a few days before their disappearance, was heartbreaking. "I don't know how much longer we can keep running, but I will never stop loving you, Thomas. I will never stop fighting for us. No matter what happens, we'll always be together in my heart." As Emily read the words, she realized the truth. Agnes and Thomas had run away together. They had escaped the pressures of their families and the world around them, seeking a life where they could love each other freely. But something had happened. Maybe they had been caught. Maybe they had been forced to disappear, to leave their lives behind forever. But what mattered now was that their love story had been hidden for so long, buried beneath layers of time and secrecy, and now Emily had found it. She sat there for hours, reading the journal, the letters, and looking at the photographs. By the time the sun had set, she knew she had found all the answers she had been seeking. Agnes and Thomas had lived and loved despite the odds, and now their story would be told, not just through the letters they had left behind, but through the life Emily would carry forward in their memory. In the end, it wasn't just about the treasure. It was about the love that had been hidden for so long, waiting to be uncovered.